Welcome to channel. Today, we explore story filled with unexpected twists. Please, subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin. Claire Blake has always seen her life as predictable. Everything seemed to be in order, from her regular employment at the local museum to her husband Martin's consistent schedule at the consulting business. It wasn't thrilling, but it was steady, which Claire found comfort in. Little did she realize, small flaws had started to appear in the foundation of their apparently ideal existence, and these cracks would eventually develop into chasms she couldn't ignore. Martin had been working longer hours 2 months prior to the event. His reasons were sensible enough: quarterly reports, a demanding customer, or training new hires, but Claire observed the strain in his eyes when he returned home, the rigidity in his embraces, and the lack of their usual laughing. She wanted to inquire if anything was wrong, but the words never seemed to come out correctly. Sophie, their daughter, was also dealing with personal difficulties. Balancing her last year of college with a part-time job and living at home to save money was not easy. While she adored her parents, their subtle conflicts were becoming more difficult to ignore. Sophie overheard her father talking on the phone in his office one night, after an especially unpleasant family meal. His tone was low and melancholy, in contrast to the calm assurance she had previously associated with him. Even though she couldn't make out the words, it made her anxious. Around the same time, Claire discovered an old picture book stowed away in a closet while looking for winter clothing. Flipping through the photos of vacations, birthdays, and anniversaries, she felt a stab of nostalgia for the closeness she and Martin previously had. Determined to rekindle their friendship, she organized a surprise weekend vacation, but he declined owing to a key meeting at work. Martin's troubles were not as simple as he claimed. A year before, he was in a minor automobile accident while commuting with coworkers. Although the physical injuries were minor, the emotional toll remained. Sleepless evenings were the norm, and the increasing strain at work only exacerbated his mental exhaustion. He had consulted a doctor who disregarded his symptoms as stress-related, allowing him to deal with his problems alone. The night before the call, Claire spotted Martin looking blankly at the family picture wall in their living room. When she inquired what was on his mind, he just shook his head and murmured something about needing some fresh air. That was the last time she saw him before heading to bed. Unbeknownst to her, Martin had driven away with no clear direction, his thoughts whirling into deeds he hadn't dared to admit until now. Nobody should have been making calls for 2 hours. Claire was unsure of the time, but the constant ringing of the phone at such a late hour was certainly inappropriate. She crushed her face into the pillow, hoping without hope that it was Martin's phone rather than hers, shouting in fury into the quiet of the room. The noise stopped after 5 relentless rings, causing a flood of relief to rush over her. But soon as she started to relax and return to her comfortable posture, the dreaded sound broke the silence once again. "Damn it!" Claire yelled, her rage pouring over as her eyes sprung open. She sat up and stared into the darkness. "Martin, will you just answer the damn phone?" Her voice trailed off as she turned to see his side of the bed vacant. She looked at the bright numerals on the clock. 3:34 a.m. Confused, she groped for her phone on the nightstand, her thoughts racing with questions. Martin had been there when they went to sleep. Where may he have gone? A sharp tremor in her fingers shocked her. She answered the phone groggily. "Hello?" A calm, unknown voice said. "Is this Claire Blake?" "Yes, it is," Claire answered, her irritability increasing. "Who's calling? Are you Martin Blake's wife?" The voice pushed. "Yes, for God's sake. Who is this, and what's going on?" Claire said, completely awake. "This is the emergency room at Crescent Valley Hospital," the speaker said. "Your husband was brought in about 2 hours ago. We retrieved your contact information from the incident report, a car accident." Claire's voice quivered as horror overwhelmed her. "Oh my God, is he all right?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," the caller continued, maintaining a professional but strong tone. "I can't discuss his condition over the phone. We need you to come in immediately." "Yes, of course," Claire said, quickly leaping out of bed. "I'm on my way." Claire leaped from her bed and dashed upstairs to her daughter's bedroom. Sophie, named for the city where she was born, was in her last year at a nearby college and stayed at home to save money. She had previously loved the independence of dorm life, but she finally preferred the calmer setting of her family home to concentrate on her schoolwork. "Sophie, wake up," Claire said quietly, shaking her shoulder. No answer. "Sophie, wake up," she said, this time with more desperation, shaking her shoulder again. Still nothing. "Sophie, wake up," Claire almost screamed. Sophie sat up groggily, squinting at the light her mother had just switched on. "Your dad has been in an accident," Claire added hurriedly. He's in the ER. Get up and get dressed. We have to go now. Sophie got out of bed and started pulling on clothing, completely unaware of her state of undress. Claire did not notice either. She was too distracted sifting through drawers to find what her kid could want. Once ready, they dashed out of the home and headed to the hospital. Sophie peppered her mother with questions she couldn't answer, making the typically brief 10-minute journey seem like an eternity. When they arrived, the nurse took them to Martin's room. The sight of him struck them like a blow. He was wrapped in bandages, unconscious, and hooked up to monitors. A nurse gave Claire some papers to complete, a sharp reminder that administrative responsibilities never stop, even in times of crisis. Sophie pulled a chair near her father's bed, her face pale with concern. About 2 hours later, 2 police officers, one male and one female, entered the room in uniform. "Good evening, ma'am," the lady said, her tone professional but empathetic. "I'm Officer Sophie Stone, and this is my partner, Jason Moore. We were the first responders at the scene." Claire stood, her fear palpable. "Do you know how he's doing?" she said, her voice shaking. She motioned to the young lady at her side. "No one's told us anything yet." Officer Stone shook her head softly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have any updates on his condition," she responds. "We're here to ask a few questions. I know this is a difficult time, but it's important we gather information as soon as possible." Claire paused and then nodded. "Go ahead. Do you have any idea why your husband might have been out so late?" Officer Stone said. "No," Claire said firmly, her face determined. "We went to bed together around 10 p.m. I had no idea Head even left until the hospital called." Officer Stone turned to Sophie. "Sophie, can you confirm that?" "Yes," Sophie said, her voice firm but low. "We all watched a movie together, and then we went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bed with Mom." "What movie was it?" Officer Stone said, her tone casual but concentrated. Sophie paused, seeking her memories. "Something with Martin Downey Jr., an action movie. It was Dad's pick," she added, barely above a whisper. Officer Stone shared a look with her colleague before proceeding. "Were there any issues at home recently? Financial struggles? Marital problems?" "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "Nothing unusual. Nothing serious." Officer Stone pushed. "Are you absolutely sure?" "Yes," Claire said. "I can't imagine why He'd leave without telling me. Were there other people involved? Was anyone else hurt?" She was asking nervously. "That's the thing, ma'am," Officer Stone said thoughtfully. "There wasn't another car involved. Witnesses saw your husband's vehicle suddenly accelerate before crashing head-on into a large oak tree at the corner of junctions 87 and 305. There were no skid marks, and no one reported seeing brake lights." Claire and Sophie halted, sharing wide-eyed looks as the ramifications of Officer Stone's comments became apparent. "Are you suggesting my husband did this on purpose?" Claire said, her voice shaking. "You think he tried to? We are considering all options," Officer Stone said quietly. "We'll need to examine the car for mechanical issues and speak with your husband when he regains consciousness." "You're wrong," Claire said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "There has to be another explanation. Maybe he fell asleep or lost control. It was so late." Officer Stone left her card on the table and instructed them to contact if they recalled anything more. Sophie carefully closed the door after the cops had departed. "You didn't tell them," Sophie murmured gently. "No," Claire said, her voice calm despite the tears. "It's not their business. If your father chooses to say something, that's up to him. Until then, we wait." The ensuing days passed at a snail's pace. Martin remained unconscious and was closely monitored in the hospital. Claire and Sophie spent as much time as they could at his side, making sure he was never alone. They regularly took turns maintaining watch, their only attention on Martin's rehabilitation. Claire, who knew Martin's supervisor personally, called to notify him of the problem and the fact that Martin would be unable to work for a time. She chose her words carefully, avoiding anything that suggested a planned act. The tragedy happened late Saturday night, and it wasn't until Wednesday morning that Martin started to wake up. By lunchtime, his eyes were opened, but his movements were restricted. Claire, who was in the room at the time, spotted his eyes opening and ran to his bedside to reassure him that everything was okay. Moments thereafter, a nurse dashed in, prompted by the monitors. Claire moved aside to give the nurse room while additional physicians came to check Martin's health. She took advantage of the time and snuck out of the room to phone Sophie and tell her the news. When her daughter did not answer, Claire left a message. As the day progressed, Martin's medical equipment was gradually removed. Though his left arm was in a cast, His right hand was undamaged, so it wouldn't be a major hindrance. With his throat still hurting from the breathing tube, he was given a whiteboard to communicate. He scrawled a note, which the nurse read before pausing to check with him. Martin nodded firmly. The nurse then entered the corridor, her look stern. She returned moments later and approached Claire, apologizing. "Mrs. Weber, I need to notify you that your husband has ordered that you and your daughter not return to his room." Claire's voice trembled with astonishment. "Martin, my husband. I have every right to be with him." "I'm sorry, but the patient's wishes take precedence," the nurse said softly. "Let me talk with him." "I'm sure we can work this out," Claire urged, attempting to pass the nurse but being stopped. Her frustration escalated into yelling. Martin, please speak to me. What's happening?" "Mrs. Weber," the nurse stated sternly, "please stop yelling. You're upsetting the other patients. You may wait outside, but if you attempt to enter the room again or continue to make noise, we will have to ask you to leave the premises." "Do I express myself clearly?" "Yes, I understand," Claire mumbled, dejected. She slumped onto a chair outside the room, head in her hands. Sophie arrived at the hospital around 45 minutes later and saw her mother sitting in the corridor, distressed. "What are you doing out here, Mom?" Sophie inquired. "Your father doesn't want either of us in the room," Claire said gently. "Us?" Sophie repeated, perplexed. "I see why he would prohibit you, but why me?" Claire's head jerked upward. "What the heck does it mean? And why did you take so long to get here?" Sophie paused. "Well, Liam came over to check on me, and we're kind of, God. Don't tell me you were with your boyfriend while your father was in the hospital," Claire said, her tone stern. Sophie shrugged. "He was unconscious when I left, so I wanted to rest. It has been stressful, okay? For what it's worth, you might want to consider doing the same," Sophie told me. "I don't want to hear it." "Sophie," Claire murmured, her voice chilly. "Let us not address this right now. It is inappropriate." Sophie chuckled at the irony and said nothing. A tall, polished brunette arrived, interrupting their heated argument. She dressed professionally, even though her badge showed she was not a doctor. "Good morning, Mr. Weber," the lady remarked, entering Martin's chamber. "I'm Dr. Brennan, a mental health doctor here. How do you feel today?" "As well as can be expected," Martin said, his voice still hoarse but steady. Martin recovered his ability to talk 9 days after the accident. The whiteboard was no longer required, but his concerns regarding when he may be released were greeted with ambiguous responses. "The hospital asked me to check in with you," Dr. Brennan said. "Do I have a choice?" Martin inquired, his tone resigned. "Not if you want to go home soon," she said with a sardonic smirk. "Should we begin?" Dr. Brennan drew a chair closer to his bed, crossed her knees, and examined his paperwork. After a few seconds, she glanced up. "You were brought here due to an accident with a tree. I also note that you have limited visits from your wife and children. I wonder if there's a relation." Martin nodded slightly. "She cheated on me," he admits. Dr. Brennan exhaled slowly. "Unfortunately, infidelity is prevalent, but it seldom results in anything as dramatic as this. Is there more to this story?" Martin sat silently, staring at the ceiling as if looking for the words he didn't want to speak. The hush lasted for minutes. He despised sharing his sentiments, particularly with an attractive lady. He wondered whether they had sent an older guy for this. But Dr. Brennan waited patiently, her cool attitude revealing no displeasure. She had seen similar hesitancy many times before. Her perseverance finally paid off. "I think I've been dealing with depression," Martin eventually said. "Not officially diagnosed or anything, but it's been hanging over me for a while. Do you know what caused it, or was it simply a general feeling?" Dr. Brennan inquired kindly. He paused again and groaned. "I couldn't pinpoint it. It began around 2 years after an injury." Dr. Brennan nodded and glanced over her papers. "The report suggests a slight concussion. Is that what began it?" "Yeah," Martin said. "My physicians conducted every test imaginable. They even repeated some. Nobody could determine the specific reason. The best explanation I received was that something occurred. Some area of my brain was harmed and affected." He trailed off. Dr. Brennan moved forward slightly, her tone questioning yet sympathetic. "And did it lead to problems in your marriage?" she inquired, putting the narrative together. "Your wife was unhappy with your bed life, which led to her having an affair. Am I correct?" "In a nutshell, yeah," Martin said, his voice low. "How long after the accident did this begin?" Dr. Brennan inquired. 7 months, maybe. We tried to work around it using, certain aids," he said, ashamed. "I understand, Mr. Weber. No need to explain further, she answered with a slight grin. At first, it seemed fine, Martin said quietly. We assumed it would be temporary, and that I would ultimately recover. We used to joke that once I got well, we'd spend the whole weekend in bed together, just the two of us, but that never happened. After a time, she opted to fulfill her wants elsewhere. Did she talk about it with you beforehand? Dr. Brennan inquired, her tone measured. Martin shook his head, his tone angry. No, I discovered out by mistake. I got home from work early one day, totally cliché, I know. She was in our bedroom with him, as were Sophie and Liam. Dr. Brennan lifted her eyebrows in amazement. Were they together? No, thank God, Martin promptly said. Claire and Frank were in the bedroom. Sophie and Liam were in the living room. That's how I discovered my wife was cheating on me, and my kid was not only aware of it but appeared okay with it. Dr. Brennan leaned back, contemplating his comments. That explains why your daughter isn't allowed in the room either, she said carefully. Yeah, Martin said, his face hardening. Oh, and Frank is Liam's father. We knew him earlier as Liam's father. Sophie, I subsequently discovered, had proposed Frank to Claire. That was another blow. Have you confronted them? Dr. Brennan inquired. Not really, Martin acknowledged, releasing a quick breath. If Sophie hadn't been there, I probably would have confronted Claire, but I'd already seen enough of my daughter's anatomy that day, so I just left. Dr. Brennan's face softened, but she persevered. And when you eventually talked with your wife, she did not deny it. Martin sighed deeply. She apologized. I knew, but she made it apparent she was not remorseful for her actions. Her logic was straightforward. If I was unable to satisfy her requirements, she had the right to find someone who could. She wanted someone who was constant rather than having sporadic flings. Frank was unmarried, thus he met the criteria. Dr. Brennan nodded slightly, her voice calm. How did that make you feel? What should I say? Martin shrugged angrily. She was not incorrect. I couldn't meet her needs. It wasn't her fault, and I didn't blame her for wanting a regular bed life, but it hurt nevertheless. Would you have consented if she had first asked for your permission? Dr. Brennan inquired. I've thought about that a lot, Martin said, his voice thick with passion. Part of me wanted to say yes because I loved her and wanted her to be happy, but I don't believe I could have done it. We made a vow in sickness and in health. I wouldn't have done it to her, and it killed me that she did it to me. Dr. Brennan nodded, her voice calm yet inquisitive. What happened after you found out? Martin sighed, his irritation obvious. She stopped concealing it. Previously, I just worked throughout the day. After I learned, it included weekends and excursions to the grocery. She was more open with him. That must have been incredibly difficult, Dr. Brennan replied softly, her face empathetic. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it, Martin lamented sadly. But I didn't know what else I could do. She deserved happiness, which I couldn't deliver. It ate at me. Dr. Brennan leant forward slightly. Tell me about the night of the accident. Martin breathed slowly. We watched a movie together as a family. I kept my emotions pent up. I figured it was best not to bother them with my misery. They said good night. Claire kissed me, and Sophie embraced me. But I knew Sophie no longer respected me, either as a parent or a man. And I can't blame her. I didn't respect myself either. He stopped before continuing. I got ready for bed, as usual. Claire fell asleep. I waited, then dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys, and headed upstairs. I peeked in on Sophie, who was sleeping. I blew her a kiss and said my goodbyes. Then I got into my vehicle. Dr. Brennan said kindly, and then? I didn't have a specific plan, Martin said. I drove aimlessly at first. Then I recalled the large oak tree. I drove past it once and then circled back. It was perfect, no barriers, and a clean road. I floored it and shot directly at it. The room grew quiet as Martin and Dr. Brennan absorbed the gravity of his narrative. After a minute, she said, Mr. Weber, thank you for entrusting me with this, she said. It's not easy to disclose something so personal. I do want to return tomorrow to finish our talk, if that's okay. Martin grinned slightly. I'm not going anywhere. Martin observed Dr. Brennan go out of the room after shaking hands. He took up his phone, which Claire had brought from home, against his previous orders not to, and began going through texts and emails. He responded to a handful, including one to his employer, to provide an update on his status. He then laid the phone aside and closed his eyes, expecting to get some much-needed slumber. Back at home, Claire struggled with her ideas. She told herself that Martin was okay with her connection with Frank, that he had just accepted it as an act of love to make her happy. When she initially heard about the disaster, She questioned if it was an accident, but now she was less certain. Claire assumed the police had questioned Martin, but hoped he had not mentioned Frank. Infidelity was not a crime, thus it didn't really matter. Perhaps the authorities attributed the accident to a botched self-destruction effort and moved on. Investigation closed. Martin had never publicly complained, had he? If he had, she couldn't remember, and she wasn't going to abandon her personal life because of a random mishap. Celibacy was not what she had signed up for, and she was not going to accept it now. When Martin returned home, she resolved to walk more carefully, perhaps reduce her contacts with Frank, but she would not discontinue the connection completely. Dr. Brennan returned the following morning, just as promised. Martin saw her more relaxed clothing, but didn't show much interest. He nodded politely as she arrived. "Mr. Weber, how are you feeling today?" she inquired with a kind grin. "About the same as yesterday, Doc," Martin said with a little shrug. "I'd love to go home, but I guess that's not up to me." Dr. Brennan gave a comforting grin. "Well, somewhat. State law mandates a 72-hour hold after events like yours. The clock began with our chat yesterday, so you have around 2 days remaining." "That's okay, doctor. The food here isn't bad, so we'll be fine," Martin replied with a slight grin. They had a quick chuckle. "It's good to see you joking," Dr. Brennan added. "That's a positive sign." "I think so, too," Martin remarked, nodding. "It has been a long since I felt like myself. Months indeed. I used to be a jokester, always mocking Sophie. It drove her nuts." Dr. Brennan cocked her head slightly, her face serious. "Have you had any dark thoughts since our last conversation? Are there any lingering regrets?" Martin shakes his head. "Not really, doctor. The depression has lifted somewhat. It has been replaced with anger and disappointment, primarily with Claire, a little with Sophie, and largely with myself. I let things go too far. I've never stood up for myself. I never informed Claire that her conduct was wrong." Dr. Brennan kept his eyes steady. "Are you going to take that stance now?" "Absolutely," Martin said forcefully. "As much as I've considered divorce, I have to confess I carry some blame for allowing her to walk all over me. If she agrees to stop dating Frank, I'm prepared to go to therapy and improve our marriage." Dr. Brennan cocked her head carefully. "That represents a huge change in viewpoint. It's unusual to witness such a speedy reversal." Martin shrugged. "I had plenty of time to contemplate while resting here. Before we chatted, I had no idea what to do. Being able to express my emotions to you helped me sift through them. I am glad for that." "Good to hear, Mr. Weber. I believe we've made fantastic progress. They'll check in with you tomorrow, but I don't see why you shouldn't be released as scheduled." "Thank you, doctor. I'm looking forward to getting out of here." When Martin was eventually released, Claire and Sophie were waiting to accompany him home. Martin was determined to turn over a new leaf, so he pretended that things were already changing, even if they weren't. The following week was unremarkable. The airbags had done their job during the collision, and Martin's injuries, apart from a concussion that made him sensitive to light and sound, were minor. The television remained turned off, and gentle music played gently in the background as he napped. Claire and Sophie were eager to assist, doting on him whenever he needed it. For a little while, everything seemed normal. Then, one day, Claire casually said, "I need to go shopping." "No," Martin said quietly, his tone steady but forceful. Claire blinked, taken off surprise. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Martin reiterated. "If we need something, make a list, and Sophie can go." Sophie, sitting close, scowled. "Why are you dragging me into this?" she objected. "I have plans with Liam." "Then you'd better finish quickly," Martin said calmly, returning his focus to Claire. "Claire, the list," he explained. Claire's expression stiffened. "This is ridiculous. You can't just come home and start making demands. Sophie has plans, so I always do the shopping. That's it." Martin's visage hardened, and his voice sliced through the room. "Do you think I don't realize that these shopping excursions are an excuse to see Frank?" Claire froze in the middle of her protest. "What are you talking about?" she inquired carefully. "You've used groceries as a cover for too long," Martin replied, his voice low but firm. "I can see it in your eyes when you look at me, or don't. I saw the additional cosmetics and fancier clothing. It is evident. And this is the end of it." Claire looked at him in disbelief, her composure faltering. Sophie, too, gave her father a look of astonishment and reluctant respect. "Marty, please," Claire pleaded after a pause, her voice shaking. "We've discussed this previously. He'll attempt to be more covert, but I won't give him up. I have the right to a bed life, and I plan to maintain it." Martin's jaw clenched, his voice thick with pain. So our vows were for nothing? In sickness and health? Were they hollow words to you? I'm sorry, but this isn't what I agreed to, Claire said. It is not your fault if you're unable to meet my needs. I have done nothing wrong. I'm going shopping, and certainly, I will see Frank. If you want to discuss it tonight, that's okay. With that, she went out and slammed the door behind her. The house became quiet. Sophie cast a look at her father, who remained still and said nothing. Martin turned and went inside his bedroom, leaving the rest unsaid. Sophie Blake had concern for the first time in her life regarding the future of her family. Her parents' marriage, which had always been the steady focus of her life, seemed to be on the verge of disintegration. Her father had never actually addressed her mother before, and despite their disagreements, nothing this severe had ever occurred between them. Sophie dried her tears, gathered herself, and departed to meet Liam, realizing she had little control over the situation. Meanwhile, Claire was dealing with mixed emotions. A part of her wished Martin would never completely recover, knowing that she would be unable to give up Frank. Frank was everything Martin was not: aggressive, unrelenting, and unashamedly forthright. Martin, on the other hand, was kind, considerate, and predictable. However, she found that compassion suffocating. Sophie arrived home at night and saw her father laying in bed. A small light seeped from the slightly open bathroom door, throwing subtle shadows around the room. She realized he had left the bathroom light turned on because the lighting in his room were too bright. "Dad," she said gently. Martin did not turn to face her, but instead said, "Sophie, I'm sorry." Her words took her off guard, and she drew closer, noting the weight in his tone. She paused at the doorway, tears filling her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking. Martin hesitated. "Since learning of your part in supporting Claire's affair, I've ceased using the friendly nicknames I used to call you. Even now, when I see the tears in your eyes, I can't help but question whether this is real or a deliberate effort to gain my favor." Nonetheless, he chose to hear her out. "I apologize for what I did, Dad. I believed I was assisting Claire. She was so upset about everything you were going through, about how you couldn't." She halted and met his gaze. "You know, you couldn't." Martin nodded slightly, allowing her to proceed. Liam's father was going through the same thing when Mrs. Graves died. He was often talking about being lonely. I believed they could benefit each other. I never considered how it would harm you. I simply wanted to make things simpler for Claire. "Is this why you did it?" Martin inquired, his voice wary. He was unsure if her unexpected revelation was genuine, but he chose to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Yes," Sophie acknowledged, her voice breaking. "I believed I was helping. I didn't know how much harm I was doing." Their gazes met briefly, and Martin managed a tiny grin. "It is over now, Sophie. I will not let this happen again." "I hope so," she responded, wiping away tears. "I need you, Dad. Are you planning to divorce Claire?" Sophie inquired. "I haven't decided yet," Martin said honestly. "It relies on her willingness to terminate things with Frank. But say nothing. If she changes, it must be because she wants to, not because she is under pressure." Sophie nodded. "Okay, Dad. I should go upstairs." "Oh, I broke up with Liam tonight." Martin lifted an eyebrow in astonishment. He had never liked Liam and had not anticipated this. "Why?" he asked. Sophie paused before responding. "Because you once told me he wasn't good enough for me, and tonight I realized you were right." Martin's features broke into a faint grin. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of pride. Sophie moved forward and held him hard, a rare moment of intimacy they hadn't had in years. When they parted, she smiled sweetly and exited the room, walking upstairs. The sound of Claire's bedroom door shutting was quickly followed by the familiar chirp of her automobile unlocking. Martin's pleasant feelings were quickly replaced with a frigid fear. He closed his eyes, preparing for what was to follow. Claire entered the bedroom shortly later, her hair moist and her complexion freshly cleansed. Martin assumed she had bathed at Frank's residence, likely in an attempt to come home without leaving any trace of her adultery. "Can you assist me with the groceries?" she inquired, her tone nonchalant. "Are there real groceries?" Martin inquired, sitting up gently. "Yes, Marty," Claire said. "I told you I went shopping, and I did." He followed her to the vehicle, unloaded the items, and set them on the counter. As he unloaded, he noted a distinct lack of perishable products. A receipt slipped inside one of the packages piqued his interest. It was time-stamped over 2 hours ago. "First, I went shopping," Claire said, as if reading his mind. "Then I went to see Frank." Despite his expectations, hearing her say it pained. Martin finished unloading in solitude and went to his bedroom, his thoughts racing. There was no use in arguing since it would not alter her conduct. Claire had made her intentions obvious. The next move was his. Claire entered the bedroom a few minutes later, her voice softening. "Would you like to talk?" "No, Claire," Martin said bluntly. "You've made your position very clear." Claire paused. She adored her husband. He was her greatest friend and the one she trusted the most, but she didn't think her need for intimacy should be a problem, given the circumstances. She hoped Martin would view it the same way. She groaned and made her way to the closet, sensing his determination. She had momentarily pondered rekindling her relationship with Martin, but this was not the time. When she returned, suited for bed, Martin looked to be asleep, or trying to be. Claire slid into bed, the burden of unsaid words hanging heavy in the air. For the time being, they were both in limbo, on the verge of making choices that would either destroy or repair their family. The divorce went everything but smoothly. Claire was outraged when the papers were served, but Martin, ever kind, had them sent to the home while he spent the day with Sophie. Claire dug in her heels after relocating into the guest room adjacent to Sophie's upstairs bedroom. She hired a ferocious attorney who pushed out all the ends, including an effort to declare Martin mentally incompetent, characterizing the event with the tree as a suicide attempt. Martin had already began visiting a well-known psychologist at the time the papers were filed, anticipating and considering such a step to be prudent. The psychologist's evidence that Martin was stable and no longer a self-destruction danger rapidly demolished that case, and the court agreed with him. Sophie intervened as Claire seemed to be about to intensify the legal fight. She addressed her mother, emphasizing that Claire's conduct had exceeded the line. "Mom, your wants do not trump the vows you made. Life isn't fair, but you promised to stick with Dad even when it was difficult. If you keep fighting this, it will ruin our relationship, possibly forever." Faced with the threat of losing both her husband and daughter, Claire reluctantly dropped her divorce case. The home was sold, and Martin consented to many years of alimony, knowing the court would have imposed it anyway. Claire leased a 2-bedroom apartment near her workplace and began full-time employment. 8 months after the divorce was completed, Claire remained furious, particularly when Frank abruptly halted their relationship. Frank had apparently been seeing other women, and Claire's attraction had lessened since her divorce. Sophie continued her education, dividing her time between her parents' houses. Claire gradually started to play the victim, continuously blaming Martin for their divorce. Sophie lost her cool one evening when Claire said, "If only he had been more understanding." "Did you ever think about Dad?" she said, silencing her mother. It was a Friday night, and Martin entered a dimly lit bar at 10 p.m. He wasn't seeking for anything serious, just a diversion, a few drinks, a dance or two, and some time to decompress. He sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey sour, and examined the audience. His gaze focused on a lady at the far end of the bar. Something about her seemed familiar. She had long, dark brown hair, and her outfit barely covered her contours. An almost emptied glass of wine was in front of her. Curious, he examined her until recognition dawned. A slight grin tugged on his lips as he picked up his drink and headed over. The lady took attention as he approached. "Dr. Brennan?" he inquired, testing the waters. She watched him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she were attempting to locate him. Martin briefly considered if he had made a mistake. "I'm off duty," she murmured finally, a little grin on her lips. "Here, I'm simply Isla, but I believe you've put me at a disadvantage." Martin laughed and leaned back slightly. "It has been a while. You presumably see far more patients than I do psychologists. I'm usually better with names than faces," Isla joked, challenging herself. "Test me." "Martin Weber," he responded, attentively observing her. She stopped and tilted her head in consideration. Martin was certain she wouldn't remember, but suddenly her face changed, and a spark of recognition illuminated her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Weber," she remarked with a playful smile. "An unfaithful wife and an unfortunate encounter with a tree, if I recall correctly." "That's me," Martin said, amazed. "I can't believe you remembered. It's been a little over a year." "Sometimes I get lucky," Isla replied, shrugging. "Would you like to join me?" She gestured to the vacant seat next to her. Martin nodded, slipping onto the bar stool and gesturing for the bartender to refill their drinks. "So, what brought you here tonight?" Martin asked. "Are you dating someone?" "I'm trying," Isla said, with a cheeky twinkle in her eye. "Really? I thought I remembered a pretty impressive ring on your finger," Martin said. "That was then. Isla said with a casual shrug. The divorce was completed shortly after we chatted. My ex-husband had more similarities with a 22-year-old cashier and her pals than with me. I could not persuade him differently. Wow, Martin said, lifting an eyebrow. Are they still together? Isla giggled gently and shook her head. You'd be surprised, Martin, but once the papers were signed, I stopped caring about Dean's marital status. Fair enough, Martin said, smiling. Please call me Martin. Or Martin. Anything except Mr. Weber. What does your wife call you? Isla inquired, her tone sneaky and mocking. Martin, he said with a smile. Well then, Martin, Isla replied, rising and extending her hand. Would you want to take me for a spin on the dance floor? With pleasure, Martin said. He requested the waiter to keep their drinks and took Isla by the hand to the dance floor. The music was energetic, and they immediately settled into rhythm. 2 quick songs gave way to a calmer one, and they remained on the floor, becoming closer. Isla put her arms around Martin's neck, and he pressed his hands firmly against her back as they danced to the music. Martin couldn't help but notice her silky physique and the slight, enticing aroma of her perfume. When the song finished, Isla leaned in close, her lips brushing against his ear. Martin, I'm tired of dancing, she muttered. But I am also incredibly lonely. Perhaps you can assist me with it. Martin did not hesitate. He grabbed her hand, walked her back to the bar, and paid the bill. The bartender did not seem startled. Outside, they entered Martin's automobile. Isla had come by lift, making the choice easier. Maybe I should have asked earlier, Martin murmured, staring at her. How much did you drink? It was my first glass of wine when you walked up, she told me. Why? Martin asked. I don't take advantage of drunk women, he told me. Don't worry, she responded with a kind grin. I know exactly what I'm doing. Martin drove his vehicle into the subterranean parking garage and directed Isla to the elevator. She clutched his arm, and they exchanged numerous passionate kisses as they climbed to his level. The tension between them was palpable, and Isla acted quickly as the door to his flat clicked shut behind them. She grabbed the hem of her dress and quickly pushed it over her head. Wow, Martin said, his voice low and awed. You're stunning. Thanks, Martin, Isla said, grinning. But will you simply stand there and stare? Absolutely not, he said with a smile. Good. Then show me where your bedroom is, she said, grabbing his hand as he led her down the corridor. Martin felt a flutter of comfort knowing Sophie was spending the weekend at her mother's house. I hope you've got rubbers, Isla joked as they entered the room. Martin unlocked his bedside drawer and found a tiny cache, which he put on the nightstand. They did not waste any time. For more than 2 hours, the two of them lost themselves in one another, and the connection was apparent. After that, they lay twisted together, Martin on his back and Isla against his side. The room was silent, and they slipped into that pleasant zone between awake and sleep. Isla moved first, lifting her head slightly. Martin, she muttered. He answered sleepily. I just remembered something from your story, she remarked, her tone interested. There was some discussion about erectile dysfunction. Could you explain? Martin laughed gently. Well, that's clearly no longer a problem. Isla grinned, but continued on. What happened? A few months after the oak tree incident, Martin continued, carefully selecting his words, I started getting this strange tingling sensation. It reminded me of how people describe paralyzed limbs regaining sensation. It carried on for many weeks. Are you still married then? Isla inquired. Have you told Claire? We were technically still married, but we'd been living apart for a while, responded Martin. And no, I did not inform her. It wasn't her business at the time. Martin's health gradually improved over the next months. Things started functioning again, although intermittently at first, and then more frequently. By 8 or 9 months, everything had returned to normal. What did the doctors say? Isla inquired. They were baffled, Martin admits, shaking his head. They did every possible test, compared scans before and after, and couldn't come up with a definite reason. Their best hypothesis was that the hit with the tree reset something in my brain, but they didn't know for certain. Well, Isla said with a sneaky grin, whatever the reason, I'm grateful. I hope you don't mind if I stay the night, she said quietly. Not at all, Martin said with a smile. As long as there's more sex in the morning, followed by breakfast. Deal, Isla said, settling back against him. They fell asleep. Martin eventually stirred again. His voice sounded gentle in the darkness. Isla? She responded sleepily. Do you believe you are prepared for anything serious? Is this a true relationship? After a lengthy time, Martin's heart sunk as he felt he had overstepped. He expected she'd get up and go, but she remained. When she finally spoke, her tone was gentle. "Can we discuss it in the morning?" "Of course," Martin said calmly. "Good night, Isla." "Good night, Martin," she said, her voice warm and soothing. Isla awoke first, allowing Martin to sleep while she took a shower. She went into the kitchen and started looking for something to cook for breakfast. Martin's question remained in her head. She wasn't seeking for anything serious, just some fun and company, but she really loved Martin. For months, she had convinced herself that she didn't need a guy in her life, but now she wasn't so sure. The fragrance of cooking awoke Martin, and he walked into the kitchen to discover Isla dressed in his shirt from the night before and an apron she'd found in a cupboard. "I was going to invite you to breakfast," he joked. "Looks like you beat me to it." "You can take me to lunch," she joked. "Go for a quick shower. Breakfast will be served when you finish." Martin arrived 10 minutes later to find the table prepared with an egg, sausages, and buttered bread. "I didn't even know I had sausages in the freezer," he remarked, settling down. "They were buried," Isla said with a smile. "I hope it's edible." Martin took a mouthful and grinned. "It's delicious." They ate peacefully, talking about unimportant matters. Martin then took responsibility of cleaning up while Isla sat on the sofa. When he finished, he turned to face her. "Are you ready to speak now?" he asked. "Mostly," Isla answered, rising and extending her hand. "But can we do it in the bedroom? It'll be more relaxed there." They sat on the bed, facing one another, with Isla gripping Martin's hands firmly. "Martin, I need to be honest with you," she said. "I think you're amazing, and I definitely like you, but there's something you should know." He motioned for her to proceed. "My ex-husband didn't just leave me for a younger woman," she added, her voice shaking slightly. "The major reason was that I cannot have children. He wanted kids, his own kids, and departed to locate someone who could provide them for him. He refused to consider adoption." Isla said that she felt like a failure after her divorce. Martin gripped her hands. "Isla, I am over 36. I've got an adult daughter. I don't mind kids, but it isn't a deal breaker." She sighed with relief, relaxing her look. "Thank you for saying that. One more thing," she said. "After my divorce, I wasn't in a good position. Losing my spouse to someone half my age shattered my confidence. I began to feel old." "You're 34, Isla," Martin stated softly. "You're not old." "I know," she said with a tiny giggle. "But at the time, I let myself believe it. I don't know if I'm ready for something serious," she added, her tone contemplative. "But I know I want to see where this could go." Martin grinned. That's all I needed to hear. They both giggled gently, and the tension in the room eased. "I used to feel incomplete," Isla said, her tone calm, yet reflective. "It is difficult to express, but I did not feel like a lady. How could I, knowing I couldn't have children? I realize it's illogical, but that's how I felt back then. So I attempted to show to myself that I was still a woman. If not via parenting, then by being attractive. I recreated myself as Angela and began going home with guys, most of whom were strangers. It was empowering at first, but it soon became self-destructive. I began visiting a therapist and gradually decreased down, but it took some time for me to completely quit." Martin reflected on her comments before deciding what to say next. "Isn't that what you did last night?" he questioned kindly, making it apparent that he was not criticizing her. "You look like you were on the prowl." Isla grinned ruefully. "Yes, I guess I was. Martin, I have once, just like any woman. But I've gotten more picky. I only go home with someone when I have a genuine connection. There are many evenings when I come home alone and handle things on my own." "Well, I'm glad I passed the test," Martin responded with a teasing smile. "You did," Isla said kindly. "And to answer your previous question, I do want to see where this goes, but I want to be open about my background. I was lucky that, despite my actions, I never contracted anything. I've been tested on a regular basis, and I can offer evidence if that makes you feel better. I don't need birth control," says Martin, "but I'd like us both to get tested and agree to exclusivity if we're going to move forward." Isla grinned. "I'm glad we're on the same page." Martin sat silently, contemplating what she had said. Isla waited, her patience concealing her anxiety. Eventually, he spoke. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he told you. "I understand it couldn't have been easy. I believe I owe you the same honesty. Our situations aren't so different." Isla cocked her head, fascinated. "After my divorce, I was relieved at first. But then the slump struck. I didn't see a future for myself. I assumed I would spend the rest of my life alone, particularly since my health had not improved. My therapist advised that as I matured, I may meet women who valued camaraderie above physical intimacy. But as my body began to heal unexpectedly, I felt compelled to show that I was still a man. I went out hunting for ladies, not to connect, but to legitimize myself. He exhaled. I wasn't really fussy. Some of the women, well, let us just say I made some bad decisions. When I met Tessa, it all came back to me. That was a wake-up call. My doctor and therapist both helped me reconsider my actions. I haven't been with anybody without protection in years, and I'd be delighted to be tested for us. Isla grinned, her eyes full of understanding. So are we doing this? You and I? She inquired, even though she already knew the answer. Absolutely, Martin said with a smile. Martin and Isla's connection strengthened throughout the course of the following several months. They spent almost every night together, alternating between their residences. Isla and Sophie got along well, and it seemed just a matter of time until they were married. The eventual showdown with Claire occurred roughly 4 months into their relationship. Martin and Isla were drinking and talking one evening at a lounge catering to a more older audience. Martin's countenance shifted unexpectedly, his grin dimming as he gazed beyond Isla. She turned to follow his gaze and saw a familiar figure approaching their way. Claire. Claire approached the table with a sneer. Despite the fact that the divorce had been completed over 2 years earlier, she still felt spiteful. She believed she had done nothing wrong but be very upfront about her romance, and the fact that Martin had moved on further exacerbated her hatred. Marty, Claire murmured, her voice full of contempt. What a surprise. Claire, Martin said calmly before turning to Isla. This is my ex-wife Claire. Claire, this is Isla. Nice to meet you. Isla said politely, her tone strong. Well, I've heard absolutely nothing about you, Claire said coldly. We're divorced, Claire, Martin stated gently. It has been more than 2 years. My life is no longer your concern. If you don't mind, he replied, his tone rising harder. I'd like to enjoy my evening. Claire's grin dimmed, but she wasn't ready to go yet. Oh, of course, she said with fake tenderness. But before I go, there's something you should know. And what is that? Isla inquired, raising an eyebrow, evidently unconcerned. You probably don't want to get too involved with him, Claire said smugly. We divorced because he couldn't perform. Martin studied Isla intently, wondering about how she would handle the issue. To his astonishment, she held back a giggle and raised an eyebrow at him. Is this real, Martin? She teased. I don't think you mentioned this. Martin shrugged. It was her turn to act as she liked. Claire's delight faded when Isla responded with a naughty smirk. Well, if what I experienced last night wasn't real, then a real one would probably eliminate it. Claire's mouth fell. Wait, what? Marty, you aren't claiming it works now? Like a champion? Martin responded evenly, just as good as ever. How is that possible? Have the doctors found a cure? Claire demanded, looking upset. They think it just needed time to recover, Martin said, his tone stronger. If you've been patient and honored our vows, we might still be married. Claire remained dumbfounded for a few seconds before muttering, I apologize, Marty. I was selfish and short-sighted. I ruined a good marriage. Claire exited the lounge without waiting for an answer. Martin and Isla watched her go, feeling a tinge of sympathy. Martin returned his gaze to Isla, a little grin forming on his lips. Let's dance, he said quietly. 6 months later, Martin and Isla married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. It was not the start of a new life. Rather, it was the continuance of one that they had both worked hard to construct together. Martin and Isla spent the years that followed creating a life together based on trust, healing, and mutual respect. Their common experiences of loss, healing, and fresh beginnings formed an unanticipated kinship that they both treasured. Martin found new meaning in his job and personal life by volunteering to assist young professionals facing similar issues. Isla, too, utilized her personal experience to inspire others, presenting workshops on resilience and emotional well-being. They often joked that their love affair started in a hospital ward and flourished under the most unexpected conditions. Sophie excelled in her work, learning from her parents' tribulations to establish a foundation of honesty in her own relationships. She served as a bridge between her mother and father, ensuring that even when their paths diverged, the family stayed united in its own unique manner. Claire's resentment faded with time. Though she never had the same level of connection as Martin and Isla, she eventually accepted her stakes and found consolation in her duty as a mother and professional. Martin and Isla spent many pleasant hours on their veranda, watching the sun set beyond the horizon. In those times, they didn't linger on the past or worry about the future. Instead, they just held hands, thankful for life's second opportunity and the strength they found in one another. The oak tree stood silently at the intersection of junctions 87 and 305, witnessing a watershed moment in life. Martin saw it as a sign of his progress rather than a source of sadness. Thank you for watching. What do you think will happen next with Martin and Isla? Please let us know in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe.